Hello class, my name is Mickie Parsons and I'm your county ranger here in Wilkes. Today we're going to talk about forestry. And the best way to describe forestry to you is the pattern that our forest grows in, the stages that it grows through its natural life. And we call that forest succession. Our forests grow in 3 different stages, the early, middle, and late. And we're going to get into why it's real important that our forests make this change and things that cause it to change. If we're going to use our forest, usually the first thing we need to know is how to identify our trees and what they're used for. So by their leaves, can you identify this? And it's a yellow poplar. See how it has a appearance like a cat or a tulip? It's known as the yellow poplar or the tulip tree. This is a sourwood leaf. And this time of year we've had a great sourwood crop of honey in Wilkes. So that provides a lot of good honey for folks. Many of you will recognize this as a holly, American holly, and we use it for Christmas decoration. And then in making musical instruments, the white wood you see in the instruments is usually made of holly wood because it will not take stain, so they can stain the instrument and that wood will stay white. So when you see those little bands of white wood in your instrument, that's where it comes from, the holly tree. This tree is a maple. We have many different species of maple, and our biggest, most popular is the sugar maple. And sugar maple is where we get maple syrup from. You might notice that it's the emblem for the flag on Canada, with Canada. Then another way that we identify trees is by their bark. Different patterns of bark. So this, if you look up and see those leaves and this bark, it's easy to identify at this time of year, but in the winter time, this is known as a chestnut oak. This tree is a white pine. This is a black oak. See the big leaves up there? And it's in the red oak family. There's 2 families of oaks, the red and the white. You have pure white oaks and your chestnut oaks, so those 2. And then you have in the red oak, you have southern red, the black oaks, northern reds, scarlet oaks. We can identify this tree by its leaves. It has a leaf that sort of resembles a chestnut leaf. And this real coarse bark, and we call this the chestnut oak. It's in the white oak family, and there's only 2 trees in the white oak family that I know of, and that's the white oak and the chestnut oak. This tree is called the tulip tree or the yellow poplar tree. You can identify it by its leaves, which look like tulips, or this bark that has this very white look to it, and it's very close, and it always has a green tint to the tree. The moss loves it, and this is one of our big timber trees in this area. This tree is known as the sourwood tree, and we use it in the bee industry to produce sourwood honey, and you'll notice that the seed pods are left over after the bloom. We were lucky and had a big sourwood crop in Wilkes County this year. This tree is known as a sassafras tree. It's the only tree in the forest that has different leaf patterns. You can see it has a turkey's foot, an oval leaf, and a leaf that's shaped like a mitten. Now this tree played a big part of history in North Carolina. Have you ever heard of Virginia Dare and the Lost Colony? You know that colony was established to gather sassafras to transport back to the old world? And this tree was used to flavor drinks, flavoring, and people still dig the roots and make a sassafras tea in this area with this tree. We identify this tree by its bark, and it has this particular characteristic that we call ski trails. And if you'll see the lines going up the bole of the tree, they look like small ski trails coming down from the top of the tree. One thing a forester or you as an individual can use in your everyday life, if you're out in the woods, you can always know where north is by this simple trick. Most of the moss grows on the north side of the tree where it's a lot cooler. So if you're out hiking and get lost, you can always tell where north is by the moss that grows on the tree that grows way up the tree. So that's where we get our identification and know how to use it. Now, where do you think our forests come from? Do they just appear? Well, they have to start with a seed source at one time. And here's some of the seeds we have. This is a loblolly pine seed. And this cone, if we plant it, it's not a single seed, so we don't plant that, but if you see in the openings here, this would have opened if it stayed on the tree and released several seeds out through the forest. So that's where we get that. But now seeds have different shelf lives. Pines usually have a 1-year shelf life. And talking about the yellow poplar, it produces a little wing seed, and the seed off of this tree can last up to 9 to 10 years. The helicopter seed you see comes from that tree and this tree, the maple tree. So they have a lot longer shelf life. And white pines, they only produce a seed about every 7 years. So we have to rely on nurseries sometimes if we want to reestablish that tree in the forest. And then we have what we call stump sprouts. And if you look around the forest here, you'll see how big the butts on these trees are, the base of them. See this? Here's a good indicator. This tree came from a stump sprout. In 1989, we had a storm that came through this area that was known as Hurricane Hugo. And it knocked all our forest down. And while we're on that subject, let's talk about what can remove a forest. Do you know what can remove a forest? Hurricanes, volcanoes, right? Mount St. Helens removed miles and miles of forest out west. Fires, harvesting, land clearing, right? When we clear land for houses, agriculture, and then we have insects. Now, of all those I just described, what do you think removes more forest every year in the U.S.? Would you say it was logging, fire, residential use, agriculture use? Actually, the answer is insects. This is a bug killed out west, and each year insects destroy millions of acres of forest in the U.S. And a lot of the fires you hear about is because of this insect kill that has happened, and they have all this fuel that the fire can feed on. And one of our firefighters was out west a few years ago, and you see the dark charring here. They had had a fire there earlier. So that's where a lot of it comes from. I personally have been on fires that burnt 40,000 acres in one day. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? Our average logger in Wilkes County, if he could cut if he could cut 1,000 acres in a year, he would be doing a big job. So it would take him 40 years to cut this forest down. Now, if he started at point A and worked his way around and come back to point A when he got through, what would be there again? Another forest, wouldn't it? Because of the natural regen that takes place, or the tree planting. Our forests provide a great buffer and a cover to prevent erosion. And the buffer prevents erosion from entering the streams. You know, the #1 water pollutant we have in North Carolina is soil, and that's caused by sometimes by poor logging, poor agricultural practices, and a lot of land clearing. So that's, if it's done right, agriculture and logging, land clearing, all can be done, and we call that the best management practices if you follow those guidelines to prevent the pollution from entering the water system. Let's talk about wildlife a minute. The deer there. We have on the poster, we have deer and turkey and rabbits, squirrels, owls. Do you think if we had just one stage of succession, the late succession, we would have as much wildlife? We wouldn't, because most of our wildlife depends on all three stages of succession. If you'll notice that the deer feeds in the early succession. When the deer has young, where do they keep their young? Where's the nursery? It's in the middle succession, so they can hide. And then also in the late succession here, deer love the hardwood mass, the acorns and stuff. So they rely on all three stages of succession there. The owl, you think he would have as much food if he stayed here in the late succession? Where does he go to get most of his food? He might live here, but he goes in the early succession where the mouse and the snakes and the lizards are, where he can see them. Now the squirrel, he can depend a whole lot on late succession. But we often see him out in the early succession, don't we? And he's over there hunting all that mass, that seed source that gets blown by the wind over into the early succession. So if we didn't have that change, we would lose a lot of numbers of our wildlife, because it wouldn't be able to support. The late can't support as much as all three stages. So it's very important that we have that. Some of the products we use every day in our life, but we've all been in a search for this a lot in the past few months. And we use this stuff daily. It makes our lives a lot easier. This is a lot better than this. And I know students all love to read. We'll talk about our magazines here in a minute. How many parts of a magazine do you think comes from a tree? All of it. All of it except the staple that usually holds it together here. But do you think the ink comes from our trees? Of course it does. All the printing. So it really makes our lives wonderful, the forest does. This package, how much of it do you think can come from a tree? All of it. All of it except the little metal foil that makes the area for the straw to go in. But can we make straws from trees? Yeah, we can make straws from cellulose. And the ink that printed, you know why it's important to use ink made from trees when we're using food products? Because it's non-toxic. If we used oil or chemicals, we could get a reaction there that we're not hoping for. We could contaminate it with a pollutant. our tools we use every day. A lot of them have wooden handles. That makes these tools a lot more usable, easier to use than just the metal tool that. I know this is everybody's favorite tool at school. And our pencils come from wood, and a lot come from a pencil. Just almost everything in our lives, somebody used a pencil at one time to scratch down the ideal and work through it to make it a working product. And this is every school child's favorite product that they're always banned from at school. Did you know that gum comes from a gum tree? And the flavoring, different flavorings, come from trees? This product, how much of this would you think comes from a tree? Would you think the black plastic comes from a tree? Well, it can come from oil real easy. But we can make it from trees. And then the glue that holds the tape to what we're taping, that comes from trees. And the spool that it's wrapped around comes from a tree. So it's very important that we use our forest wisely and we keep them sustainable. The houses we live in, they all have a lot of tree in them. Usually just a brick veneer and maybe an asphalt roof, shingle roof, or a metal roof is all that's not made up of trees in the concrete in the footer of the foundation. A lot of species of fungi rely on the forest. This fungi is known as a turkey tail mushroom. You can see it's coming up from a stump, and it has a lot of medicinal purposes. That's about it.